This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Breaking Bank Europe. Today, we are going to talk about regenerative finance. I didn't try enough time to say this word, regenerative finance. Okay, we know decentralized finance. This is another acronym, ReFi. We are going to learn. We have a fantastic guest. Is Raphaël Haupt. I say that correctly?
Good enough. It's Raphaël Haupt.
Haupt. Okay. Sorry, my name is Capodieci. Can you imagine how many difficulty I put on people to say that? Raphaël,
I really have no ego with names, so
right. Okay, so Raphaël is the founder and CEO of Toucan. There is a company that does regenerative finance, ReFi, between other things. So I see that you have a background in electrical engineering, correct? A master's degree in transitive energy market, education in economics, industrial engineering. So really all the bases, high-tech innovation management. So you lead the
that was the worst.
Toucan, right? That was the worst.
That was the worst, I can tell you. It was just a buzzword. I've just been collecting buzzwords. That's
a buzzword collector, okay.
I'm a buzzword collector. This is how I landed in the blockchain space,
Well, I don't see artificial intelligence now.
Yeah. I'm still trying to come up with something.
All right. So what is Toucan? And then, we're going to try to understand that is regenerative finance, because I think the name may lead to a lot of different interpretations. So Toucan is an organization focused on developing digital infrastructure for climate finance. So this is the first good point, is climate finance. So carbon credit, carbon market, and the people in Toucan are technologists, carbon market expert, and marketer, right? So this is what put together Toucan. I saw that you guys already had a huge amount of success in trades, in tokenization of these things for the market of climate and carbon. So where ReFi fits in all this? It's strange because regenerative, the first connection comes to my brain with regenerative are batteries, car batteries, right? The regenerator, something like this. I guess it's nothing to do with that. So how is this connected to blockchain, and how does it work so that we can understand better the whole thing?
Let me start. So there's a lot to unpack, and you just interrupt me if there's anything that is not clear, but I'm actually going to start with the regenerative keyword, right? Because the regenerative keyword is one that means a ton of things, I think, to different people, and it's not always clear what exactly it means. So I can just, for us, basically, if you think at the mode of the world runs today, I would say we could categorize it as extractive, right? So we're extracting value, we're polluting, and so overall, the more business, as usual continues, we're extracting more and more. So then there's sustainable. Sustainable is basically, if you think about it, you're like basically, if you're like extracting, you're putting the same amount back, right? So so you're basically neutral. You're sustainable, so you're not really good, you're not really bad, you're just sustainable. Sustainable was kind of the thing for the last 20 years. But if we're not take the jump to like carbon specifically, we already have too much carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in general in the atmosphere. So even if we were like going to net zero, so we were completely sustainable and we would not emit we would keep we would not emit more carbon into the atmosphere, or that the level of emission and the level of kind of drawdown kind of cancel each other out. we still have too much carbon in the atmosphere, right? So that's where regenerative basically comes into play. Regenerative is that basically by doing your business, you're actually improving the soil, improving the capture of carbon in the system. And it's not just only related to carbon. It's basically like you are regenerating, you're kind of putting back value and improving ecosystems, etc. So that's kind of what the kind of rough idea of regeneration is that you have extraction, you have sustainability, and then you have regeneration. So kind of linking this to finance is like that our financial system today is extractive, right? So we don't talk about the petrodollar for nothing. It's like most of our money essentially is backed by extractive activities, either directly by pumping oil out of the soil and kind of converting that into money, or by just financing extractive activities, mining, etc. So the idea is that if you look at the history of the world, on a lot of metrics we've like improved dramatically, right? Like health, we've improved dramatically. Education, we've improved dramatically. The only thing that as a society we're kind of struggling to solve is that we have more and more greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and our temperatures are rising constantly. And there's not really a good solution to it, right? I was at the COP in Dubai in like the end of last year, where all the nation states are coming together to maybe find a solution, to coordinate to find a solution for how we are going to stop climate change. But the reality is like we're very, very, very far from actually realizing that. And so the idea of ReFi, regenerative finance, is that what needs to happen is that we need to put regeneration kind of at the lowest level of our everyday operations, right? And so finance is, in a lot of ways, is a key function of our economy. And if we can kind of twist, if we can turn around and if we can make finance regenerative, that is, in my view, like a massive lever to actually stop climate change through, so that as an end consumer, you don't really have even to realize what's going on, right? So I think the most classic example is like if you choose a bank account where you know that the money that you have on your bank account is actually used to fund regenerative projects. Like I think that there's a good example of how your choice of parking your money with a bank that actually invested into kind of improving the conditions in the world rather than extracting even more is a good example, right? So that's kind of the broad picture. So Toucan started very humbly as a hackathon project, actually. So in 2020, I went to a hackathon in London, an Ethereum-focused hackathon, and it started with a very basic idea, which was that blockchains back in the day, and to a certain extent, some blockchains still today, are extractive, right? So Bitcoin specifically is running on a proof of work algorithm. So there's a lot of energy that is basically being consumed to keep the Bitcoin network alive. And the same was true for Ethereum back in the day, right? Since then, Ethereum has moved to a new consensus, a new consensus mechanism called proof of stake, which is like 99.9% more energy efficient. But back in the day, was still very, very energy intensive. And for me, as somebody who's really passionate and fascinated by Web3 as an industry, and really excited about kind of its application to energy markets or carbon markets, I couldn't kind of, I was struggling with like, being fascinated by it on the one hand, and at the same time, knowing that it is a super polluting industry. And so Toucan actually started with a very simple idea of like, how can we make blockchains carbon neutral, right?
Okay.
And so when you operate a smart contract, the idea was that we could have green smart contracts so that whenever you run the smart contract, it would automatically purchase carbon credits, retire the carbon credits, and then basically be a kind of carbon neutral smart contract. So that's how Toucan started. And then I went to so the hackathon was great. We then like won a kind of an incubator program run by Consensus. And then I joined a venture builder in London called Deep Science Ventures. And that's really where this idea took a new turn, because turns out that the carbon market itself is a pretty broken system. And so what happened during that time is that I realized, actually, there's something more here. It's not just that we need to like bring carbon credits to the blockchain to like make the blockchain carbon neutral. Actually, the carbon market really needs an open system, like an open transaction layer to operate, right? Because at the end of the day, what the carbon market is trying to do is trying to finance positive behavior somewhere else in the world, right? And the challenge is that it's really hard to know if that thing that you're claiming that happened actually happened. So there's a lot of trust issues in the carbon market. And specifically in the voluntary carbon market, where basically you as a polluting company, you're purchasing carbon credits, which are supposed to represent that positive externality that happened somewhere else in the world. Like, you really have to make sure that that happened. And there's been a lot of instances where it turns out that it didn't happen.
I had also this feeling there is also a very easy way to wash somebody's consciousness. It's like if I commit a crime and I pay somebody else to go in prison for me because already maybe did prison for, like in a certain way, if I am the reason for the trouble, I need to take action on myself. It's too easy to, balance myself out for say, okay, I damage things here, but somebody is making their better, so I pay to balance things out.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Look, that's definitely the case. The way that I'm looking at it, it's a waste management problem, right? Like, when you're like, living your life, you're creating waste, right? You're going to sort it into plastic and organic, whatever. And then you have to pay somebody, typically is your city or wherever, depending where you live, like somebody's going to pick up your trash and you pay for that, right? That's a service that you pay, and then your trash is going to get recycled, etc. Greenhouse gases is just the same thing. Like, you're doing an activity, and your activity creates trash, right? It creates waste that needs to be cleaned up. Now, I don't have a problem with paying somebody else to clean up my waste. So this whole narrative of like carbon credits being like, a kind of cheap way out, I really don't buy it. And there's been actually good data and good research that showed that companies that actually purchase carbon credits also reduce their own emissions significantly more. And that's because if you want, like most labels, like in the world, like science-based targets or anything like that, they don't give you a label unless you've proven that you have actually first started decarbonizing your own supply chain, your own activities. So carbon credits should not be your first choice. Carbon credits should be your last choice, right? So you start by reducing your own emissions like as much as you can. Then you switch to renewable energy rather than like coal or whatever. You work on reducing your scope 3 emissions from your suppliers, etc. But the reality is that this is surprisingly complicated, and carbon credits are only there as a transition mechanism to, in the time that it takes you to really kind of get to net zero in your own activities.
Okay.
You can finance transition, or like the creation of positive externalities somebody else in the world. And I think the reason that I'm not opposed to that idea is because if we're very pragmatic, it's like we have like a few years left to kind of turn the corner, right? And the reality is that I live in Western Europe, and like super privileged, but the reality is like climate change is not going to decide itself like whether or not Western Europe manages to switch to like
it's a global problem.
It's a global problem, and it's really about like is the global South going to go through the same cycles as Western Europe did, and like if they do, we're doomed, right? Like if the reality is that a lot of the wealth of Western Europe and the US, etc., is built on the fact that we've been polluting the atmosphere like crazy, right? So
mostly we create damage in other parts of the planet that we never considered even existed, right? For the good of myself here, I create a lot of trouble somewhere else, which eventually karma, once this trouble is catching up with me, so I will be the one responsible. I cannot start going in that country and blame them to fix and clean up the dirt that I made. So it's for sure I take a responsibility, and until it becomes actual law to be imposed, I think it's just a very good way to a little bit show off. All the voluntary part of it is a marketing tool more than an actual. There must be some CEO that is in fact sensitive to the problem and he does something, because there is also good people in this planet, fortunately. But most of it is really, I think, just a way to either get an advantage in somewhere else. That's why probably putting this into finance mechanic, they also give me an advantage somehow for working. Can work also good for the environment, right?
Absolutely. I think I'm just trying to think about it in a very pragmatic way, which is like, we need to move trillions, and we need to move trillions of dollars towards regenerating our ecosystems and drawing down carbon. That's a fact. Like and so moving $1 trillion is not easy, right? It's actually pretty difficult, especially in a decentralized manner, which is like what's going on, right? So, and that's where the whole blockchain part actually comes into play. Is that like, if smart contracts are good at one thing, it is coordination, right? Smart contracts allowed like a lot of people to coordinate easily, and we're just using that as a way to think about, okay, how can we distribute like trillions of dollars like across the world to the most impactful places to draw down carbon and regenerate our ecosystems? Like, that's a pretty complicated problem to solve in itself. The verification part like is key, right? And so at the end of the day, a carbon credit is just data and signatures that attest that this data is correct, right? So if you think about a tree planting project, for instance, you need to make sure that the trees are there, and you need to make sure that the trees are growing, and so you
that's correct. It's the bridge between the digital and the actual, real part. For as many, we work with digital twins or something, create an NFT of each tree that has been planted. But at the end of the day, who's there to guarantee, who take the responsibility, who's the person to be trusted? Because it's really the opposite of the blockchain, where you don't need to trust somebody for the information that are in the blockchain. But when the blockchain is representing to me something that is physically there, I need to close this gap, and I need that to trust somebody for what happened, right?
Absolutely. And it's the old Oracle problem, is like, what data do you put on? And so this chain of trust that is happening, like, okay, this is the data, testing that the data is correct. Ideally, maybe I can double check that data is correct by using some satellite images that like are not 100% accurate, but at least give me like a good like range of like, yeah, this looks real. This doesn't look real. Here's maybe a red flag, etc. So we have to use technology in order to improve the way that we verify what's going on the ground. And then the blockchain really is just a kind of registry system, like a ledger that keeps track of like, okay, what's been happening, who has said that it's happening, who owns it, who claims the environmental value for it, etc. So it's that part basically that we focus on with Toucan specifically, is we're returning carbon credits into, you said it, like a digital twin version of it, which gives us the possibility to keep track of like, okay, who owns it exactly, how many times has it kind of been moved around. We can transact it like super easily between parties. We can retire it with like all of the relevant metadata. We create an NFT that acts as like a proof of retirement. Basically says, okay, I have used this carbon credit up to claim, that I don't know, my toothbrush is is carbon neutral. It's a bad example, but yet
No,
get
it
my
makes
point.
sense.
And so we're really just saying, okay, like we have a global coordination problem. We need some way to collaborate between each other, and we need a way for making sure that if somebody does something positive on one side of the planet, somebody else can pay for that, and know that it's real. So that's basically and the carbon credit is really just the vehicle, the kind of financial vehicle that allows somebody to make that claim, right? It's just a way to transport that money from one side of the planet to the other side of the planet, and know that it actually happened.
Okay, it's interesting.
I just want to say, like, roughly 80% of carbon credits today in circulation are not real, or are not what they claim to be, right? There's a spectrum between they're not real, which means that they're worth nothing, and that's not the case for most of them. But a good chunk, they're not what they claim to be. So specifically, a carbon credit is supposed to represent 1 ton of carbon reduction or removal. And in a lot of instances, unfortunately today, it doesn't add up to a whole ton. There's been some over-accounting, some over-crediting happening. And so it can be or it's very frequent today that these carbon credits may not represent a whole ton, but maybe only half a ton, or a quarter of a ton, or something like that. And so that's part of the issue that we have in this market today that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, probably we should have this real collector of pollution that makes bricks, and then you goes by the kilo. You can say is there, is stored there, go see it. No, but something I liked that you said was when I go to the bank and I can say my bank account, the money I put here, you should can only use them for project to finance project that are. This is very nice if it was true, meaning if I can trust the financial institution to actually follow my requirement, but the regulator should monitor this part. Because, for example, in the electricity bills that we received in Italy, for example, you can say, I want only to consume electricity that come from renewable sources, for example, and, refuse electricity that is produced in methods that are not good for the environment. Then they do it for real later. I mean, hard to say, but at least give the illusion to say, I mean, I'm doing my part in this selection of things. So if there is a method to not bring 100% of guarantee, but at least to raise the level of validation of the statement, then it's more than welcome. So even for everything, probably can expand. If I sit at the restaurant and I want to know that the cow are being free range, rather than the collection of the ingredient has been made in a way that doesn't damage the environment, and I can actually follow the trail to see all the supply chain and to see, in fact, and maybe make a phone call to the company or to the farmer. This will make more difficult to the large corporation to lie. And bringing this in finance, I like. But is the name regenerative finance something that you have invented, or is something that was there?
Look, I don't know who came up with the name. It just showed up at some point. I have to say, I came up with a significantly worse name, which was decentralized climate finance, so DeFi, which really doesn't roll off the tongue as easily as refi. So I think it might have been Gregory from Regen Network or Sean from IXO. I don't know, but at the end of the day, no, I've been very kind of high level. Let's try to get specific exactly on how it applies today, right? So Toucan right now, we have a partnership with a Finnish carbon standard. They're called toucan.earth, and they're the biggest carbon standard for carbon removal in the world. So carbon removal is basically the activity of drawing down carbon that is already in the atmosphere and storing it permanently. So that means that as a Puro account holder, you can now take your carbon credits that are on Puro and turn them into a token on Toucan.
Okay.
And we're using the API that they have essentially to like convert a poorer carbon credit into a token that represents that exact credit with the serial number, all the metadata, etc. The next step, and we're launching a new product in like a couple of weeks, it's called a biochar pool. So basically, we now have a carbon credit that represents a poorer carbon credit. We are basically creating like a standardized instrument, like a conversion mechanism to take your poorer carbon credit. And in this instance, we're only using biochar credits. So biochar credits are credits that are generated when somebody is creating biochar from organic waste and storing that biochar underground. And so we are creating a pool where different carbon credits from different projects, all of them being biochar projects, can be bundled together in a single pool. Okay. And then that creates a mechanism where somebody now can purchase or sell into the pool. It acts almost like a warehouse of sorts where...
All right. So it sounds like a color carbon credit. You have different kind of... and maybe it's a very good thing to differentiate them. It really gets into the mechanic of finance with vehicles that are created with different products. So I can see this. Regenerative finance. Raphaël, it's been a very interesting chat. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We are at the end of our episode for today, episode 210 of Breaking Bank Europe. And for everybody else, stay tuned. Come back next week. We have more episodes coming on. And Raphaël, thank you for sharing with us about regenerative finance.
Of course, thank you. That was quick. I get carried away. So check out toucan.earth if you want to see more, or reach out to us if you want to learn more about refi.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.